There is a quiet war taking place in the background of your life. You don't hear it, you don't see it, but you feel it. In the constant scrolling, in the hours lost to distractions you don't remember. In the subtle erosion of your soul, every time you silence that voice, the one that calls you to become more. The tragedy is not that we are weak. It is that we have been trained to run from the very power that would liberate us. You cannot save the world while you're addicted to escapes. No man who is enslaved to his compulsions can liberate another. No woman who numbs her truth can awaken the truth in someone else. We have been fooled into believing that comfort is peace, that pleasure is purpose, that freedom is the ability to avoid pain. But what if the opposite is true? What if your soul is not at war with pain, but with numbness? What if the world doesn't need your opinions or your perfect image or your high-functioning mask, but the raw, unfiltered, resurrected you that you buried underneath 10,000 digital escapes? Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And now we live in the age of absurdity. We've built an empire of distraction so vast it has become a substitute for identity. We do not know who we are, we only know how we scroll. We do not sit with ourselves, we swipe ourselves away. What began as leisure has mutated into anesthesia. And so we bleed purpose by 1,000 tiny cuts and call it a normal life. But there is nothing normal about dying with your power locked inside you. There's nothing normal about betraying your mission to maintain the illusion of calm. You were not built to be a domesticated algorithm. You were made to remember, to burn, to stand with unshakable truth in a world that sedates itself with shadows. And that kind of strength, it can't come from the surface. It can't come from more dopamine. It can't come from distractions dressed up as healing. It comes from descent into the darkness you've been running from. Psyphoria. The intoxication of psychological escape. It is a drug of the modern soul. The invisible chain that binds the visionary to a couch, the warrior to comfort, the healer to self-neglect. Do you understand how dangerous a person becomes when they finally stop numbing? When they no longer require validation from illusions? When they sit in silence and face the beast within, not to slay it, but to integrate it? Jung called this holding the tension of the opposites, the sacred art of facing your contradictions without flinching, not suppressing the shadow, not performing the light, but standing in the storm of your soul until the mask dissolves and something ancient breaks through. This is the beginning of clarity, because clarity does not come through calm waters. It comes when the lies are ripped away, when your soul has had enough of being sedated, when your rage, your grief, your longing, all the parts you've shamed and shunned rise up and demand your attention. Do you feel it now? That unrest you've labeled anxiety, what if it's your soul trying to wake you up? What if the reason nothing satisfies you is because you're built for something beyond this hollow simulation? You see, the most dangerous addiction isn't to substances. It's to avoiding the inner work, to believing that you can save others while hiding from yourself, that you can speak truth while living a lie, that you can change the world without first burning through your own illusions. But no real transformation begins in the light. It begins in the dark, in that place where no one is watching, where no one applauds, where the only voice that matters is the one you've ignored the longest, your own, because that voice knows. It remembers who you were before the world programmed your escapes, before society told you to be polite instead of powerful, to fit in instead of wake up, to smile instead of speak truth. And now it whispers. You cannot save the world while you are still sedated by it. You cannot awaken others while your own soul sleeps. And so, the question is not, how do I help others? The question is, am I ready to die to who I've been pretending to be? Because the old you, the one addicted to hiding, to pleasing, to scrolling, to fitting in that version, has to die if anything real is to be born. The rebirth does not come gently. It is not a spa day. It is a psychological crucifixion. It is the annihilation of everything false until only the raw, radiant, ruthless truth remains. But that truth, it is where your power begins. And from that power comes vision. Not the kind of vision that trends on timelines or wins you likes, but the kind that pierces through delusion, that sees past the masks of culture and recognizes the divine chaos underneath. Vision is born from silence, not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence. The kind of stillness that comes when you finally stop running from yourself and ask, what was I sent here to do? Not what you were told, not what makes you comfortable, but what your bones know, even if your mind forgot. The world does not need another influencer. It needs another soul on fire, a soul that remembers, a soul that sees the poison in the pleasure, a soul that chooses responsibility over escape, integrity over validation, truth over temporary comfort. Because when you stop escaping, you stop leaking power. When you stop numbing, you start noticing. And when you stop avoiding your inner chaos, you start becoming the kind of person who can walk into the chaos of the world and not flinch. That is the energy that heals. That is the presence that saves. Not by force, not by preaching, but by being. You want to save the world? Start by facing your own shadows. Not fixing them, not erasing them, but listening to them. Because behind every compulsive escape is a wound that was never met with presence. And behind every wound is a lesson that once learned becomes power. This is the alchemy of transformation. This is the death of distraction. This is the birth of purpose. You were not sent here to survive your timeline. You were sent here to crack it open, to stand so fully in your truth that others feel theirs awaken in your presence. But none of that happens while you're still escaping. So the next time you're tempted to scroll, to binge, to flee from your silence, ask yourself, what am I afraid I'll feel if I stop running? Because that is the doorway to your freedom. And once you walk through it, the world you once tried to save will no longer control you. It will no longer seduce you. You will no longer mistake escape for peace, because you will be home, in your body, in your truth, in your power, unshakable, awake, unstoppable. And when that moment arrives, when your eyes finally see through the veil and your mind stops chasing the next escape, you will understand a truth so blinding that it silences all the noise. You were never broken. You were buried under layers of expectation, cultural hypnosis, and the pixelated prison of convenience. You were never lazy. You were spiritually starved, not undisciplined, but unaligned. And every false craving, every distraction you thought you needed was just your soul crying out to be remembered. We don't heal by cutting out our shadows. We heal by facing them, by sitting with them, by listening to their language and decoding the ancient messages hidden beneath our compulsions. That's where the transformation begins, not in pretending to be perfect, but in owning the chaos with a sacred defiance. The world doesn't need your perfection, it needs your presence. And true presence only arises when you become still enough to feel what you've been avoiding for years. Why do we keep reaching for what destroys us? Because we forget how to sit with discomfort. We forget that peace isn't the absence of pain, but the presence of self. And you cannot be present if you are constantly escaping. Escapes offer illusion. Illusions offer comfort. Comfort offers sedation. And sedation kills revolution. No one changes their life in sedation. No one remembers who they are while numbing their truth. Every revolution begins in discomfort. Every breakthrough begins at the edge of silence. And every awakening begins when you choose to stay with the feeling instead of fleeing from it. The world trains you to believe that happiness is external, that healing is found in buying, that power is found in performance. But you are not here to perform. You are here to become. And Becoming means burning the masks you've worn to survive. The good person mask, the productive mask, the always smiling mask. Burn them. Not in hatred, not in rebellion, but in reverence. Because underneath them lives the you that the world cannot touch, the you that doesn't need escape. Because you are no longer afraid of yourself. This is not a soft journey. It is a brutal love affair with the truth. But in that truth, something miraculous happens. The fear begins to dissolve. The compulsions lose their grip. The endless noise begins to fade. And in the quiet, you hear it your calling. Not a career, not a job, but the soul-deep compulsion to bring something real into the world. Something only you can bring. But here's the paradox. That calling can only be answered by the version of you that is no longer enslaved to distraction. The version of you that is stared into the abyss of addiction, not just to substances, but to validation, to noise, to false peace, and said no more. There is power in the refusal. The refusal to run, the refusal to be seduced by the temporary, the refusal to give your life away to things that numb your soul. That kind of refusal is not resistance, it's resurrection. You are not here to escape life. You are here to transform it. And that transformation begins the moment you stop betraying yourself for the comfort of illusion. You want freedom? Then embrace the weight of awareness. Because awareness is heavy. It holds you accountable. It strips away your excuses. It forces you to confront what you've ignored. But it is also the birthplace of power. And that power, it's quiet, it doesn't scream, it doesn't perform, it doesn't need applause, it just is. Solid, still, undeniable. It is the kind of power that comes from knowing that you don't need anything outside of you to be whole. That you don't have to fix yourself to be worthy. That you don't need to escape your pain to prove your strength. You just have to stay with the breath, stay with the discomfort, stay with the rawness of your own becoming. Because in that staying, you will reclaim the parts of you that you abandoned in the name of survival. And once you are whole, you are dangerous. Not in the violent sense, but in the liberated sense. Dangerous to systems that profit from your insecurity. Dangerous to illusions that feed on your numbness. Dangerous to the cycles of mediocrity that collapse in the presence of someone who is fully awake. Because a liberated soul doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. They become the change. They don't seek validation, they embody truth. They don't chase the world, they anchor it. You are that anchor. But only if you return. Return to yourself. Return to what you feel. Return to what you know in your bones, but forgot in your mind. The world is starving for realness. It doesn't need more noise. It needs presence. And presence cannot exist in a mind addicted to escape. So choose, not once, but every day. Choose truth over comfort, depth over distraction, clarity over chaos, discipline over dopamine, reality over illusion. Choose the you that doesn't need to run anymore. Because when you stop running, you remember. And when you remember, you rise. Not in ego, but in essence. And when that essence takes its place in the world, everything begins to change. Not because you forced it, but because you became it. And that is how you save the world. Not by escaping it, but by being the kind of soul it cannot corrupt. And once you become the kind of soul the world cannot corrupt, you stop needing to prove anything. You stop trying to convince others to wake up. You stop arguing with people still hypnotized by the very system you've escaped. Because you know now the fight is not out there. It never was. The battlefield was always within. Every moment you spent distracted, sedated, chasing false highs, those were not failures. They were fragments, clues. Each escape was pointing you back to the place you didn't want to go. Inside. Inside, where the noise can't hide you. Inside, where the truth doesn't bend. Inside, where every mask you've ever worn disintegrates under the light of awareness. That's why people run, not because they're weak, but because they feel that intensity. The raw, ruthless honesty of facing your real self. Not the version curated for approval. Not the version filtered for praise. The real self, wounded, wise, unfinished, and powerful beyond belief. But you can't carry that power while carrying your crutches. You must put them down, one by one, slowly, intentionally. And yes, it will feel like death, because in a way, it is. It's the death of distraction as your protector, the death of approval as your oxygen, the death of fitting in as your identity. And in that death, you don't disappear, you emerge. You don't lose yourself, you remember. The real you doesn't need the world to approve. The real you doesn't need an escape plan. The real you doesn't flinch in silence. Because the real you was built for this storm. Look around. The world is collapsing under the weight of its own deception. Truth is being traded for dopamine. Depth is being replaced with display. Meaning is being buried under convenience. And if you are not vigilant, you will get pulled into that current where everyone is floating but no one is alive, where everyone is smiling but no one is free. That is not your path. That is not your destiny. You were made for more than that sleepwalk. But to live wide awake, you must let the illusions burn. Let them. Burn the idea that healing is supposed to feel good. Burn the myth that clarity comes without pain. Burn the lie that you can stay the same and still be reborn. Every version of you that was built on fear, let it crumble. Every belief you inherited from pain, let it dissolve. Every identity you wore to survive, let it return to ash. Because only then can the phoenix rise. Not the mystical creature of fantasy, but the real fireborn essence of who you are when you stop escaping your becoming. That's the only version of you that can change the world. Not the numb version, not the distracted version, not the polished version, the integrated version, the forged by fire version, the version who has nothing to hide because they've walked through hell and turned it into wisdom. You don't inspire others by pretending to be healed. You inspire them by being real about your mess, your darkness, your journey. Because when you no longer run from those things, you carry a presence that heals on contact. That kind of presence doesn't speak to the mind, it speaks to the soul. And the soul recognizes truth the moment it feels it. That is your real impact. Not in what you say, but in what you are. And what you are becomes clear the moment you stop escaping who you could be. This is not about perfection. It's about permission. Permission to break, permission to rage, permission to feel all the things you've been taught to suppress, because in those feelings lives your fuel. You don't have to be fearless, but you must be willing to go where others won't, willing to stop numbing, willing to sit in the void without reaching for a screen, a substance, a distraction, willing to hold your own gaze in the mirror and not look away. That is the doorway, that is the rebirth, and no one can walk through it for you. But once you do, the world shifts. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You no longer see escape as relief. You see it as theft, the slow theft of your potential, the silent drain of your energy, the soft kill of your soul. And so you stop feeding it, not out of punishment, but out of reverence. Because you finally realize your energy is sacred. Your focus is fuel, your presence is power, and every time you give those things to an illusion, you are starving the life you could have lived. You can't save the world while starving your own soul. You can't liberate others while locked in your own loops. And you will never be free while worshiping what numbs you. So stop apologizing for needing depth. Stop shrinking to fit shallow conversations. Stop pretending comfort is your goal. It never was. Your goal was always growth, always awakening, always liberation. And liberation does not come with ease, it comes with fire. The fire of truth, the fire of discipline, the fire of staying when everything in you wants to run. Because when you stay, when you really stay, something inside you snaps. And that snap is not the breaking point, it is the birthing point. It is the sound of false self cracking under the weight of real purpose. And from those cracks pours light, a light that doesn't blind, but reveals, a light that doesn't burn, but baptizes, a light that doesn't just illuminate your path, it becomes your path. And that is the moment you stop being a seeker and start being a seer. Not just of visions, but of reality. Not just of potential, but of presence. Because now you know you never had to find your way. You just had to stop running from it. And once you stop running from your path, you realize it had been waiting for you all along, not in the distance, not in some future version of yourself, but in every moment you chose presence over performance. You begin to feel it in your bones, that sacred return, the slow, fierce reclamation of everything you once abandoned in the name of fitting in, the truths you swallowed, the rage you silenced, the desires you hid. All of it begins to surface, not as chaos, but as clarity. Because when you no longer escape, your soul starts speaking louder than your fears. And when your soul speaks, the noise of the world becomes irrelevant. This is what true responsibility feels, like not duty to others, but duty to your own becoming, to live in a way that no longer betrays your inner world just to survive the outer one, to stop outsourcing your self-worth to algorithms, to stop numbing your intuition just because it demands a level of honesty you're not used to. That's the cost of awakening. It asks for your comfort and gives you your power. It strips away your distractions and replaces them with direction, and that direction will terrify you because it's not safe. It doesn't come with guarantees, but it's real, it's raw, it's yours. Every great awakening is preceded by a collapse. The collapse of who you thought you had to be, the collapse of identities that were never yours to begin with. And in that collapse, the temptation to escape becomes louder than ever. You'll want to run, to numb, to disappear back into the softness of sedation. But this time you don't. This time you breathe, you stay. You watch the false self fall apart. And instead of saving it, you let it die. Because now you know what dies was never the truth. What dies was never the source. What dies is the mask. And the moment the mask falls, the soul can finally exhale. You cannot imagine how powerful you become when you stop abandoning yourself, when you stop negotiating your peace for temporary relief, when you stop selling your presence for digital currency. The power is not in the performance. The power is in the refusal to perform, to stand in a world addicted to noise and be the quiet, to stand in a culture obsessed with image and be the essence, to stand in a sea of empty escapes and be the anchor. That is a rare kind of rebellion. And that rebellion begins the moment you declare, I will no longer flee from my own fire, because your fire is not your enemy. It is your forge. It burns what isn't real. It destroys what no longer serves. It purifies what was polluted by false narratives. And when you walk through that fire, when you face the discomfort, the shame, the cravings, the fears, you come out on the other side, not as a version of someone else's dream, but as the embodied truth of your own. You are no longer chasing alignment. You are alignment. You are no longer searching for peace. You are peace. Not because it was handed to you, but because you earned it. By staying, by feeling, by choosing not to run. And this sacred refusal to escape is how you begin to lead. Not from a stage, not from a screen, but from your energy. Because presence is leadership. Integrity is influence. And the soul that has faced itself cannot be manipulated by the illusions of the world. You don't teach people to wake up by telling them what to do. You wake them up by becoming the living contradiction to everything they've been conditioned to believe. that real power is quiet, that healing is ugly, that truth doesn't sell but it saves, and that the way to change the world is not by escaping it, but by embodying the very thing it lacks: consciousness. You don't need more content. You need more courage. The courage to stop scrolling and start living. The courage to put down your phone and pick up your soul. The courage to sit in silence and hear the truth echo through the chambers of your being. It was never about being perfect. It was never about fixing yourself. It was always about remembering. Remembering what you are, what you carry, what you've always known, but forgot in the noise of distraction. That you were never meant to blend in. You were meant to break patterns. You were never meant to numb. You were meant to notice. You were never meant to escape. You were meant to embody. An embodiment isn't glamorous. It's gritty. It's messy. It's full of moments where you doubt everything and yet still choose to stay. But in that staying, you become unbreakable because you are no longer a slave to the avoidance of pain. You are no longer manipulated by false pleasure. You are no longer hooked by the lure of illusions. You are sovereign, rooted, fierce, awake. And it all began the moment you stopped escaping. So now, here you are, standing on the edge of something irreversible. You've seen behind the curtain. You've felt the weight of the truth. You've realized that every distraction, every escape, every cycle of numbing you've endured, it was never just about avoiding pain. It was about avoiding power. Your power, the kind of power that doesn't come from noise, but from stillness. The kind that doesn't manipulate, but magnetizes. The kind that doesn't scream to be heard, but changes the room with its silence. And this is your final choice, not just to stop escaping, but to finally step into that power and never look away again. No more hiding behind screens. No more begging the world to tell you who you are. No more bowing to impulses that steal your presence. You do not need another permission slip to become whole. You do not need another app, another follower, another filter, another hit of dopamine to be enough. You were already enough before the scrolling, before the noise, before the escape. You just forgot. But now you remember. And once you remember, you become responsible for your energy, responsible for your truth, responsible for your presence in a world drowning in absence. This is what it means to awaken, not to be perfect, but to be present, fully, ferociously, without apology. This is what it means to rise not above others, but into the deepest dimension of who you are. This is what it means to stop escaping, not because you're forcing yourself into discipline, but because you've fallen back in love with your own existence, the rawness of it, the divinity of it, the weight, the fire, the beauty of being fully here. So, from this moment forward, you choose, not once, not twice, but in every breath, in every silence, in every craving that comes to pull you back, you choose truth. You choose stillness. You choose presence. Not because it's easy, but because it's everything. This is your revolution, quiet, eternal, unshakable. And now, you don't just remember who you are, you embody it. Because you were never here to escape the world. You were here to awaken it.